Welcome to U-Wrench. Today we're back working on the Mark V Grand Caravan, also applies to the Chrysler Town & Country, and in this particular video we're going to be showing you how to do a complete brake rotor and pad change. So we're going to be going from this to this. So let's get stuck in. Now, a quick thing to note when it comes to the Mark V Grand Caravan and the Chrysler Town & Country is they come with two different brake options. You have standard brakes or heavy duty brakes. And on this particular vehicle we do have the heavy duty version. But we have also filmed a version of this video showing the exact same procedure on the standard brakes as well as a video that shows you how to determine whether you've got heavy duty or standard if you're not sure which you have on your car. And we'll add links for both of those videos into the video description below in case you need them. But here on the rear of the car, the job is virtually identical regardless of which version you've got. So let's crack on. So just a quick overview of some of the main components here, just in case you're new to working on brakes. So what we have here is a two-part caliper that consists of the main caliper here, which is this central section right here, and then around the outside of that we have the caliper bracket. And the caliper bracket is actually bolted onto the hub of the car with their two bolts on the rear. And then this central section, the caliper itself, that's bolted on to the bracket through these bolts here that come in through slider pins into this section here. You'll see all this as we progress through the video. If you have a look in this little window here, right across the middle, that's going to be the edge of your rotor. And then either side of that, you're going to have the facing of the brake pad and the backing of the brake pad. So in this window, you get a good idea of what the condition of the pads is like. So what we want to do next is actually want to detach our caliper away from our caliper bracket, and to do that we need to get these two bolts on the top and bottom just here. And the eagle-eyed amongst you may notice that we've got our spring removed here. This is because we're actually going to be doing the full caliper replacement. We've got a bigger job to do. However, if you are replacing just your pads or your rotors and pads, you do not need to disconnect your spring or your handbrake cable. That stays on as normal. As you can see, our calipers are pretty rusty. So I've got some penetration fluid here. This is plus gas, but you can use liquid wrench, even WD-40. They do a good penetration spray, which can be picked up on Amazon pretty cheaply as well. Always a good idea to use these penetration sprays, especially if you have got some corrosion like we have. So I'm just going to put a little bit here on the bolts, and I'll do the same on the bolts on the back here. Because it does take a few minutes for this stuff to soak in. What it does is help soak in behind the corrosion, get into the thread a little bit. Sometimes this can make the job a lot easier. So now grab your size 13 socket. I'm going to remove the top and the bottom bolts. These are the bolts that are holding the caliper onto our caliper bracket. And once your bolt's out, we actually want to put that back in for a second. And just tighten that up a little bit by hand, because we don't want this caliper to start moving as we're undoing the lower one. And so now we've got our bottom one removed, we can go ahead and remove the top one again. So now both removed. So now we want to slide the caliper off over the top of our brake pads. To enable us to do this, your parking brake must be disengaged, it must be off. Grab yourself a flathead screwdriver or a pry bar. A good place to get in behind the caliper is just here, in this little gap here. And you're going to work that there and just try and get things starting to move. Ours are pretty rusty and grotty here, but it's just starting to get a little bit of movement. There it comes. And we can do the same here at the bottom. There we go. This isn't the happiest caliper in the world, but he's slowly coming. So if you alternate between the top and the bottom, it should be 5 times easier to get yours off than what you're seeing here. This is kind of worst case scenario. Everything's all rusted and corroded up. If you keep alternating between top and bottom, it will come. And the problem that we've got on this particular caliper is there's been a problem with the parking brake on this one, and so I know that these are slightly compressed. Normally this should just slide straight off nice and easily. We're having to fight it a little bit here, and you shouldn't have to. There it comes. Now it's important that we protect this flexible brake line that we've got here, so you don't want to leave this just kind of hanging off the car. You don't want to be putting weight onto that flexi hose. I've got a cable tie here. You just need to find somewhere suitable to tie it up. So Okay, I'm going to put it right here. So next we need to remove the old brake pads. Now the pads have little ears in them, just here, that sit inside these little metal brackets, which you can see here, so they should slide backwards and forwards in these brackets. However, as you can see, ours is pretty badly corroded, so I'm going to assume that ours aren't going to slide very easily. A good place to put the screwdriver is just here against the backing material of the pad. Just give it a light, gentle tap, just get it to start moving. And then once you've got a gap in there, you can put your flathead screwdriver in and start to lever it. Because what we've done is we've basically pushed that pad forward. So that pad's basically now it kind of forward at an angle like this. So we need to push the bottom of it back flat. So we're putting that in, giving that a pull. It should allow us to start leveling things up. Same on these ones. So for safety, we don't want the rotor accidentally coming off of the vehicle. So I'm putting a bolt back on here just to hold it in place. And it's always the best idea to put that as close to the 12 o'clock position as possible. Now if you are coming in behind the pad, like we are here, because ours are quite stubborn, if you're keeping your old rotor, if you're only doing a pad change, be careful when you put it in that you're only levering it in this direction. What you don't want to do is start pulling the tip of the screwdriver into the face of the rotor. So it's okay to put it in behind the pad and lever it from the edge of your rotor here onto the pad like so. What you don't want to do is start pulling it in this direction, because that's going to force this into the face of your rotor and could cause damage. And there's our first pad removed. It's going to be fairly gentle. These are a little bit delicate. You can see there's these kind of pins that hold them in, these little clips around the outside. So if you give it a wiggle, you can kind of see what's holding it in. Just gently give it a bit of a push all the way around, start loosening it off. Now we need to remove our caliper bracket. We've got two big bolts here on the back, one here, one down just there, and these are size 18. And then again, just like we did on the top ones, just going to pop that back in, do that up a few turns just to stop this from moving whilst I attack the bottom one. So now we can undo these two bolts. We can remove the bracket away from the car. You may have this little extra bracket here that the clip goes through on the bottom, like we have here. If so, make sure you keep that and bring it all off together. So now we need to remove the rotor. So take our wheel nut off here. We put on there just for safety. And then carefully lift that off and away. So whilst we got this stripped down, it's always a good idea to give it a bit of a clean up. So grab your wire brush. I clean the face of the bearing here and around the edges. Also these faces here where these meet, make sure that you clean these off front and back. So next I'm going to do a little bit of a clean up just where the shims were, just down in here. Get a little bit of a build up of dirt in behind them there. So you're going to grab your wire brush and we're going to give these a bit of a clean up. Get them nice and clean in there as well. The other place worth cleaning up is these areas just here as well. This is where it actually attaches onto the hub. You get metal to metal. You tend to get a little bit of corrosion just creeping in between them. So again, you can just give that a bit of a quick wipe over at the same time. So now we've got these looking pretty good. A little bit of brake cleaner, and just give these a final clean up. Careful not to spray brake cleaner onto the rubber boots just here, and repeat on the other side. Okay, so looking at rotors, these are the new rear rotors, and the rotors on these vehicles are different sizes depending on whether you have standard or heavy duty brakes. The ones we have here are for the heavy duty versions. So again, it is really important that you order the right ones for your car, and we do have that video which is linked in the video description if you're not sure which version you have. Thankfully, the rotors on these are really cheap. These rear rotors, looking on Amazon, $50 to $60 for a pair. And again, we will be adding those links into the video description for all the components that you see. As you can see, the ones that we have here, these are drilled and slotted, and also what they call black hats. They have this protection in the middle. Helps protect against rust. And we will be adding links for both this type and also the standard ones, which are non-drilled. If you do have drilled or slotted ones, they may well be sided, so bear that in mind when you come to fitting them. Now you'll notice in the bag here, these come coated with a layer of grease on them. Now it's really important that we clean this off before we're using them. We don't want any of this grease to be soaking into our nice new brake pads. So we can use the box here. Pull that out, put that down with this side facing upwards. So now I'm going to grab our brake cleaner. I'm just going to use that to get these surfaces nice and free of grease. So now we can flip this over and clean the other side. Now there may be grease on the cardboard because obviously we've put the brake down. It doesn't matter if we get a bit of grease on our front here, that's absolutely fine, as long as we don't get it on the actual facing of the rotor. So when we flip this over, put that down, of course this bit on the underside is not going to be touching the cardboard. The same again, it's going to get rid of all this horrible grease. So I gave the face of this a quick clean over with the wire brush and a little bit of brake cleaner earlier, just to clean that up. I was going to grab some, this is just normal copper anti-seize. I'm going to put a very light layer on the face here, just to sit between the wheel bearing and the rear of our rotor. And what this does, it helps prevent the components from binding together. So if you ever had a stuck disc that's stuck onto one of these, it can be a real pain, and also help prevent the build-up of some of this corrosion that we can see here. So it's only a really nice thin layer, and be sure not to get it on the threads of the wheel nuts here, wheel studs. Just a nice layer all the way around the face. And then also a little bit around the edge here. So now we can take our new rotor, slide that into place. And then we've got to get one of our wheel nuts on there to make sure that this definitely can't fall off. So next, it's always a good idea to remove and have a look at the condition of your slider pins, and also lubricate them whilst they're out as well. So we'll take a quick look at the basics of it. What you have is a metal pin, as you'll see in a second when we pull it out. And below that, you can see we've got this this rubber boot, and this rubber boot goes all the way down. As you see, I turn that. That's the bottom of the rubber boot there. So to release this, all you do is just literally pull it out, and it will pop off like so. And then likewise, to remove the boot, just give it a bit of a twist, and try and remember which end went on which end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that down in that direction, so I know that it went through in that direction. So now we'll inspect the condition of the pin and the fixings, and then we'll lubricate it and get it back together. Now let's start by getting rid of some of this old grease. This is actually a very nice looking pin. It's nice and shiny and new. This either this caliper's been replaced in the not too distant past, or they've fitted new slider pins. These are in really good condition. And the basis of what we have here on the slider pin, that rubber boot, the lip of it sits in this little groove just under the head here. So when you pop this off, you want to make sure that there's no kind of corrosion or gunk or anything that's built up in there. If there is, you can get a flathead screwdriver and just start to get as much of that stuff out as you can. And then once you're happy with it, that it's looking good, give the whole thing a quick blast with the brake cleaner, and so it's nice and clean and ready to refit, and then we'll look at the other elements. So the next thing to look at is, again, the other end of that rubber boot sits into this lip right here. So again, you want to visually inspect that, and if you can see any corrosion or crud or dirt in there, just get off as much as you can, and then give that a wipe over with some brake cleaner. When you do the brake cleaner on this side, don't spray it into the hole, spray it onto your rag, and then use your thumb to work it in around the edge there. And next, grab your torch, shine it in, and kind of look down it and visually inspect it. This one looks like it had a good seal on it, so I'm not expecting to see any contaminants in there. If you can see anything that looks unusual, any particles, any bits of rust, anything at all, that needs to be cleaned out. This one's not. This one's actually looking pretty good again, because it had a nice seal to begin with. If you do want to give it a clean, and finally, just take a look inside your rubber boot here, and again, you're looking for any contaminants, crumbs, bits of rubbish that shouldn't be in there. If this holds a good seal, which this one looks to have because it was very clean around the edges on both the pin and on the carrier side, then it's highly likely that this has been successful in stopping dirt and water and things like that getting in there. So, but always worth double checking, because that's a good telltale sign. Sometimes they can be full of rubbish if you've had a bad seal. So next up, we're going to apply some grease to the pin before it gets refitted. Now, the grease that you can either use your kind of dedicated brake grease product, as we'll be using in just a minute, but I actually prefer, and again, this is just personal choice, moly grease, which is a lithium-based grease, and this is designed for things such as this, and for things like CV joints, where you've got kind of a metal on metal, and also rubber boots and things of that nature. It doesn't degrade the rubber, so this is a really good grease to use. But you know, if you haven't got 2 or 3 greases to hand, as we've been using in this video, you know, you can go ahead and just use your standard dedicated brake grease. So just apply a little bit in towards the end. Just want to get a nice seal as this comes up. Give that a bit of a twist. There. Squeeze out the excess. That should give us a nice seal there. Then you want to pull this back as far as you can. Get it in behind the rubber boot if you can. You're going to be fairly generous with it, but not too much. Like so, and then we'll just slide that back in. And what you'll find is you have the grease, the excess kind of grease will spill out. That's absolutely fine. We'll wipe that off in just a second. So what we're going to do is just give it a bit of a push and a twist, and see that's popped back on. So I'm just going to wipe away the excess. If you give that a bit of a twist, that will allow you to wipe the excess off, but also ensure that you get a good seal. So that's kind of the key to the slider pins, really, is making sure that you get a good seal on both of the ends there. So of course, what you want to do is repeat exactly the same process on your other pin. So a quick look at the brake pads. When you're buying your brake pads, again, these aren't very expensive. Pads such as these on Amazon, you're looking at about $25 for a rear set. It's always worth making sure that the set that you get come with the replacement shims. So these are the metal shims that fit inside the Caliper bracket, and the pads actually slide backwards and forwards in these. Always much better to get new ones whenever you can. And again, just to make things super easy for you, the Amazon links that we'll be adding into the video description for you will be sets that definitely include the shims. So what we want to do next is fit our new metal shims into our caliper bracket. Of course, if you don't have brand new ones, you can always clean up your old ones. Give them a good wipe over with a copper brush and get some brake cleaner on them. You can normally get them coming up pretty clean. Now if we look at our new shims, we've got 4 shims, but they're not all the same. If you lay them out like this, you can see we've got 2 pairs. Look at this little spring, it's on this side, but on these 2, the spring is on the opposite side. And the way that these fit in, they fit into these little slots here. And the spring here, this curved bit, needs to be on the outside. Obviously it can't be on the inside, because the rotor sits on the inside. It needs to go on the outside. So that will be the correct position there for that shim. Also, you might be wondering what this little arm is actually for. If you've not seen this before, it might confuse you as to where the little tab on the pad actually sits in relation to this metal arm. This is actually a spring that's designed to help pull back the pad when you take your foot off the brake pedal. And the way that this goes on is you should have that little end of that tab. Hopefully you can see that alright, just in that bottom corner there, is on the front face of the pad there. So what happens is when you squeeze the brake pedal, the piston pushes the pads in this direction, and you can see when you release, the spring wants to pull that pad back out. So it's just a kind of an added way of helping release the pressure when you take your foot off of the brake pedal. So always that little tab there, just in there, needs to be on the front side, just in there. If you look on the shims, you've got these little metal arms, 3 of them, and they just literally clip into place. So what we want to do is line this up. Be careful with the little arm that's in the middle. And this just needs to be pushed down nice and solid. Just want to make sure that it seats all the way down. And then grab one of the opposite ones, and this one goes in on this side. Remember these little spring tabs, these little springs on the end, always to the outside, never to the centre. The rotor needs to be in the centre. Now of course repeat that on the other side, fit all 4. So now we want to add a little bit of brake grease into these to make sure that the pads can slide backwards and forwards nice and freely. This is just a standard brake grease. Again, there will be Amazon links for this. Just a nice thin layer of grease across all of our facings here. So now we're going to fit the bracket back on. So carefully slide this over the rotor, and we've got our bolts here. And remember, on the lower bracket bolt here, if you have this little plate, that needs to go back in place. So now grab yourself a torque wrench, and we need to torque these up 100 Newton meters or 74 foot-pounds. Okay, now on your new pads, always a good idea to put a little bit of grease just on these ends, just here. This is the part that slides in and out of our little metal shims here, just giving them a little bit of extra lubrication. Now with regards to the squeal arm, that's this little metal arm that we have here, and basically what that does, as when your brake pad wears down, it will start to touch the bottom of this metal directly onto the rotor, and that will start making a squeaking sound, so you know that it's time to replace them. As a general rule of thumb, these should always be placed on the leading edge. So if you imagine that the car's moving forward, this wheel would be moving in this direction, and so this would be the leading edge, which is actually the bottom. And remember, we do have these little funny spring clips that we were talking about earlier. We want to make sure we end up on the correct side of those. So I'm going to angle these slightly inwards, just past those spring clips. Twist the whole thing around and push it in. Then just make sure you've got nice free movement. You can slide backwards and forwards nice and freely. Now you want to do exactly the same for the pad on the rear. I've just applied some grease there. And one thing to bear in mind again, if you have the squeal arm on the bottom, which is the leading edge. And also with your grease, be careful if you've got grease on your gloves. You don't want to be applying grease to the face of your pads. The pads are slightly absorbent, and so if you put grease on there, it will actually soak in. Obviously that's going to have a very bad effect on the performance of your brakes. So be sure not to get any grease on your faces here. Another option is to put a little bit of grease here on the backing, just where the two arms sit. Just helps stop things binding together. It's not really necessary on the more modern pads. They've already got these backings on them, but it does help. You probably saw earlier in the video how badly binded up all of ours were and corroded. This should just help just that little bit. So next you're going to have to rewind the piston in your caliper here. Now because we've got this brand new caliper, this is already fully rewound. However, of course, if you're putting your old caliper back on, yours won't be. And the reason that this needs to be rewound is because this actually comes out slowly over time as the brake pads wear. And so this gap gets smaller and smaller and smaller as this piston comes up. So of course, when you go and put new chunky brake pads in, they're not going to fit. And so what we have to do is we have to rewind this to make sure that the gap is maximized again so they'll fit over the new pads. Now we have done this on a previous installation, so we'll show you that now. So the next job is going to be to retract the piston back into the caliper. Before we do that, we just want to check the condition of the rubber boot, get rid of any dirt or grime that's around it, give that a bit of a wipe off. You don't want to use your brake cleaner on this, obviously, because that can perish the rubber. I'm just going to give it a bit of a brush down, make sure that there's no splits or tears and it all looks to be in good order. Obviously, if you do have a tear in this, then you're going to have another job to do, because unfortunately you're going to have to replace that seal. But this one's looking good. So rear pistons are generally completely different to front pistons. On the front pistons, you can literally just push that straight back into the body of the caliper. You can't do that generally on rear pistons like this one, because this actually has to be wound in a circular motion, almost screwed back down into the body of the piston. And that's why instead of having a completely flat face, we've got these little notches top and bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a brake rewind tool, which can be purchased really cheaply on eBay or Amazon. You're talking about $25–30 for a complete set, and it will do any make or model of car and will last forever. So they're a well worthwhile investment. You can buy small little square tools that actually fit onto the end of your wrench, and they can be okay sometimes, but they're not as good as the dedicated tools. And I have had problems in the past where I couldn't get the teeth in the little cube tool to match up 100%, and the whole job ended up being a bit of a nightmare. So the cube tools are probably half the price. They're probably $15, but it's really worthwhile investing a little bit of money into getting a proper rewind tool. So this is my brake rewind tool. We're actually producing a video on how to use these brake rewind tools. If you need a little bit more assistance, be sure to check that video out. We'll add a link for you below. First thing you want to do is find the correct plate in your set that fits into your caliper. So now just offer the whole thing up, and it should slide in over the top. Push your These are slide bolts, slide pins, just push them back if they're in the way. Should line up just around there. Get our bolts started. When you come to tighten these bolts up, you'll find that the slider pin will want to spin around. But you can see it's got a little flat edge on the underside of it. It's a size 19 on this particular one. So what I can do is I can put that on there, and that allows me to counter hold it to stop this turning when I do the bolt on the rear. And grab your torque wrench, and we're going to torque this up to 35 Newton meters, which is 26 foot-pounds. Remember to counter hold, and then do exactly the same on the bottom. And so there we have it. That is how to fit yourself a new set of rear rotors and brake pads. So safety first. Before you jump onto the highway and start doing 120 kilometers an hour, you really want to test these brakes first. Best way to do it is just to drive slowly backwards and forwards on your own driveway and just make sure that the brakes appear to be operating correctly. And if everything seems good, take it for a short, slow drive around the block. Again, just making sure that everything feels exactly as it should. That brake pedal should feel nice and firm, and the brakes should be good and reactive. And if all of that is good, then we are job done. If this video has been helpful for you, it would be really good of you if you could please use our Amazon links to buy any of your brake components. So thank you once again, we do appreciate it. Hopefully you'll hit that like button for us before you leave. Also be sure to subscribe, we've got hundreds more videos on these cars just waiting for you to check out. Thank you again, we'll see you down the road.